Open your cerebral cortex and shift your lobes into upper beta phase, because you are going to have Bitcoin knowledge transmitted directly into your vestibulocochlear. Your host at Bitcoin Knowledge is Trace Mayer, an early Bitcoin advocate since it cost $0.25, but this is not intended to be investment advice. A doctor of jurisprudence, but this is definitely not legal advice. And an investor in core cryptocurrency infrastructure, including Armory, BitPay, Kraken, and Nitagio, but this is not a recommendation of those services. Here, you get fed via direct mind download with pure and free Bitcoin knowledge.
Welcome back to the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast. Been a little busy lately. Anyways, I'm going to do a quarter 3 of 2016 in review. Talk a little bit about the new version of Bitcoin Core that's coming out with segregated witness. Then going to go through a couple reader questions. One of them seemed to be extremely pertinent, and it's going to naturally lead into the last section where I talk about this circus that we've had in the United States about this Molotov cocktail called Trump. And, just the bigger picture, I think it's important for everybody to really understand the situation that we're in. So, we do get into some of the politics of it, but really I think it's very important for everybody to understand the circumstances. So even though we get into it, it's really much more focused on like actionable stuff that I think is very important for people to consider. So anyways, we'll be a little off topic there, but in the overall big scheme of things, I think it's important. So with the latest release of Bitcoin Core, segregated witness is a huge deal. It's going to help reduce UTXO growth. Well, first, what is segregated witness? We're able to take some of the signature data in the Bitcoin blocks and actually segregate it so that it's not part of the actual block, and that frees up and allows a whole bunch of other stuff to happen. It frees up space, resources, etc. One of the things that reduces UTXO growth, which just makes Bitcoin easier to run full nodes and stuff like that, which is good. Additionally, we get to clean up transaction malleability. That old friend of Mark Karpelès that he blamed the failure of Mt. Gox on. How segregated witness does this? It allows Bitcoin users to put the malleable parts of the transactions into the transaction witness section. And by segregating that witness, then it's not going to affect the calculation of the transaction ID, like if there are any changes to the witness. So that's a big deal. It's going to be helpful for a lot of services in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Another thing, we get linear scaling of signature hash ops instead of quadratic scaling. So that just makes it so much easier to scale Bitcoin up in terms of size and do it safely. The proposals that came out of Gavin Andreessen, like increasing to 100 megabyte blocks and 20 megabyte blocks and all of that, it just really showed how dangerous it could be, like doing a hard fork like that. And so this is just a much better way of scaling Bitcoin up. And it's going to lay a foundation to do even better scaling, even much more efficient scaling. For example, we're going to get script versioning. And what's going to happen with the script versioning is that things that previously would have required hard forks with additional opcodes, they're going to be able to perhaps be used based just on like a script version instead. And so this is just going to allow us to deploy things as soft forks instead of hard forks, which is just way better for the network as a whole because of backwards compatibility. A couple things that are kind of now coming onto the horizon are Schnorr signatures, although they're still in concept phase, and also MAST, which are Merkleized abstract syntax trees. So with the Schnorr signatures, one of the really cool things I like about it is the ability to aggregate the signatures together. For example, like I had Rodolfo Novak on from CoinKite, and we talked about some of the edge cases with multi-signature and how really 20 out of 20 is like the largest we can really do with multi-sig. And even in Armory, I think we have like 12 of 12. Well, with these Schnorr signatures, what you're able to do is you're able to aggregate the multi-signatures together into just a single signature. So you could have like 1,000 of 1,000, and yet there's only one signature that shows up in the signature data. And so that's really cool. Additionally, I mean, and that could lead to all different types of security application and other stuff to make Bitcoin more secure, more scalable, more usable. I mean, imagine like crowdfunding where you're able to aggregate all these signatures, or just for cloud mining out there, or Bitcoin mining pools, like, to be able to put all of those payouts, but then it just goes in one signature. Like, it's just a lot of really good use cases. Can reduce the costs. You throw it in the mix with stuff like CoinJoin and segregated witness, and now you're decreasing the size of the transactions. You're increasing the privacy and the fungibility. All of this stuff just makes Bitcoin so much more competitive, such a better use case. So I'm excited about that. MAST, these Merkleized abstract syntax trees. So, okay, first, like, Merkle trees are cryptographic puzzle. We love puzzles in Bitcoin. And you have like Merkle leaves, and you can have Merkle branches, and they all connect to this Merkle trunk, and eventually you get down to a Merkle root. And what that means is you can have all these different data sets, and you're able to you're able to reduce the data set to just a hash. And you can't go the other way, right? So you can have the hash, and you can have a Merkle leaf, and you can prove that Merkle leaf is included in the overall Merkle tree, but you don't know how many other leaves there are. You don't know what the numbers of those leaves, what the values of those of that data is in those particular leaves or branches or trunks or whatever. And this is a big deal, because if we're able to have additional new SIGOPS and use other scripting abilities in the protocol, but we're also able to do it with these Merkleized abstract syntax trees, then I mean, we could be running, like, we could have multiple different script possibilities, but then only the script possibility that actually gets executed comes into the blockchain. So you're able to remove, or at least make unseeable to anybody, any of those other potential outcomes from the scripting. Okay, you kind of following me here? So that helps increase like the fungibility of the coins, because like if there's 20 different possibilities of how stuff could play out, and one particular way plays out, only that one particular way is what is able to be seen in the blockchain, and you don't see the other 19 other possible ways it could have played out. So that really like helps with some fungibility issues, some other fun stuff like that. I had a question from a reader, book suggestion. I'd really recommend Andreas Antonopoulos' Mastering Bitcoin. And yeah, I agree. And another part of the question was just about Bitcoin security being fundamental to its destiny, is like just this huge thing that's going to change the world. And I agree. Like, security is a huge part, and we have it with Bitcoin. Chad had called in on the SpeakPipe. He wanted to say he had left a tip. Thanks, Chad. We appreciate all the tips. Helps with the costs of editing and hosting the show and everything. Someone else suggested I interview Chris Odom. For those who haven't been listening to the podcast very long, I did interview Chris Odom. He's actually a good friend of mine. February 12th, 2015 was the show. I'd recommend going back, listening to it. I try to conduct the interviews in a way that they're evergreen or timeless. So I'd recommend, downloading even some of the older shows and going through them and listening to them, because there is some actionable stuff. You're going to pick up stuff. You're going to learn stuff. Everybody seems to really like the high-quality interviews. So there you go. I interviewed Chris Odom already. Next time I see him at a conference, I'll try to herd the cat and interview him again. I have a question from David, so I'm going to play that and then answer it.
Hello, Trace. My name is David. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on an excellent podcast. I have learned quite a lot about Bitcoin and the blockchain just from listening to your various interviews and reading your various articles. So thank you very much for that. My question is about...
Yeah, so just to summarize his question, he actually wanted to talk about like a triangular arbitrage between the Brazilian real, the Chinese yuan, and then some of the other currencies like British pounds or euros or dollars. First, I don't know what's going on with this, like whether there's any software or services that kind of automate this. From what I understand, I haven't talked to Aaron Zerker at Coinado for a while, so I don't really know what he's doing over there because he's trying to do some stuff like this, and I'd interviewed him on the podcast. I would say that there's probably nothing that's going to automate this. There probably is a lot of good opportunity, though, because there's nothing automating it. So it really opens up something for an entrepreneur. However, one of the problems that you're going to run into if you try to do stuff like this is you have to have a lot of capital for the time, for the float, right? And this doesn't just apply to arbitraging the different currencies because, you know, like Brazil, you have to get approval from the central bank to even make a wire out of the country, and that can take 45 days. And like yuan's got currency control. I mean, it can be a real problem. But it also applies to other businesses like Bitcoin ATMs. So you've got this time difference. You kind of have to build all this into the model that you're using for the price that you charge and the spread and the fees and all this stuff. There's a lot that goes into it. You just got to be careful with that and have ample capital to be able to play all that stuff. Anyways, I got another question from Anthony, and my answer to Anthony is actually going to be contained mainly in this political section where I talk about this Molotov cocktail of Donald Trump to the establishment. But anyways, I want to play a little bit of Anthony's voice message first before I get into that.
Hey, what's going on, Trace? I just wanted to say thanks for sharing all the great information that you do on your podcast and then on your website. It's really put me in a position now that I don't have to work the whole 9-to-5 thing. Now I am attached to the trading markets. I've been taking cryptocurrency trading courses and things like that, but ever since I fell down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, I just kept immersing myself. And the more I learn, it's kind of like the whole housing collapse. Part of me is just thinking, if Bitcoin does soar up in value, that means that the yuan or the won is quickly deflating in value, which we can see in the market. A lot of investment hedge funds are shorting it, but a lower risk would be just to invest in Bitcoin, right? Well, I'm in the middle of trying to figure out a way to, I see how you're going on in the direction of offline hardware and, the whole, how are you going to store this Bitcoin? Because I believe it's going to be worth more than gold very soon, probably sooner than later. But I wanted to ask you which direction you would recommend going, or if you could talk about that on the podcast, because I'm working on a website.
Yeah, so this is a really complicated question that he's asking, especially in the context of like world events, the macro picture, right? And I'm really glad that he's in a position where he doesn't have to work. That's one of the reasons I started talking about the blog, with the podcast, with all this stuff, is really to kind of, be a voice of warning, you could say. Because when you see like something bad coming down the pipeline, you want to let people know, right? So that they can prepare for something bad that's coming down the pipeline. I mean, I'm not the type of person that would just, stand on the side of the street and like not tell somebody, hey, there's a car coming, you might want to get out of the way. And, and I'd warn, I'd help. I wouldn't just stand there and be silent. Because I want to be helpful and useful to people, and like I want to, I suppose it's just motivated out of love that I have for humanity in general, unlike some people. So, that leads us to this election that we're dealing with, and part of the reason I've been kind of quiet the last few months is I've just been really busy, like taking care of some other stuff. And I recently just got back from Washington, D.C., and down in D.C., I went and toured Mount Vernon, George Washington's estate, and they have a whole bunch of stuff on the Constitutional Revolution. And like what the people actually really went through and what the soldiers went through. And then we went to Ford's Theater, and I got to see like the Civil War and what everybody went through with the Civil War. I mean, that thing was bloody and it was bad. And, went down by the Washington Monument where they have the World War II Memorial. And they have all these gold stars up there. There's like 4,068 gold stars. And each gold star represents 100 U.S. soldiers that died in World War II. So like 400,000 soldiers. Okay, what do all these things have in common? And also Franklin Roosevelt's memorial. I went to that. And one of the etchings, one of the quotes that it had was, "This generation has a rendezvous with destiny." Franklin Roosevelt talking about this. Like, what do all of these three events have in common? Well, there's a book that was published back in 1997 called The Fourth Turning. And it was written by a couple of demographers. Demographers are basically statisticians who look at and apply it to the study of demographics. So, population science, you could say. And one of the things that you can't really change that much are demographics. They just are what they are. There are a certain number of people being born, certain number of people dying. Like, it's happening on just these large scales. And the assertion in this book, The Fourth Turning, is that just like we have a human life that's about 80 years, and just like we have seasons and cycles, we get these seasons and cycles based on generational turnover. And so you have about 20 years of spring, and after spring, more or less, comes summer, and summer lasts about 20 years, and then you have fall, and fall lasts about 20 years, and then you have winter, and winter lasts about 20 years, and then you have spring after winter. And, it might be 19 years, or it might be 21 years, or whatever, but we know that spring, and then summer, and then fall, and then winter, and then spring again. And these are the cycles that humanity goes through in these larger generational ways. And so, in spring is a time of renewal, and the institutions are still wet concrete, and you're able to mold them. And then they harden during summer, and summer's the good times. The good times are rolling, and it's just great, and everybody's happy. And then there's fall, there's an unraveling, and then winter becomes a crisis, and the crisis always continues to escalate in its intensity. And eventually the crisis resolves itself, and then coming out of the crisis you have spring. And so the reason you get these cycles, as they argue in the book, is that people who come of age during summer, they are shaped by entirely different generational factors and culture than people who come of age during a winter crisis period, for example. And because of that, they raise their children a different way. And so their children raise their children a different way too, but those children react to their macro circumstances in particular ways based on how they were raised. And so you get people who come of age, during summer, and they raise their kids a certain way, but then they're the ones in power when unravelings or crises start to happen, and they don't really know how to deal with it because they've never been through a winter before, right? Like, they were born during spring, they came of age during the summer, they're in middle age, during the unraveling, then they move into the elderly age before they die. Well, guess what? The Fourth Turning, the first one in American history, it happened with the Constitutional Revolution. You had this unraveling that happened. 1776, you have the signing of the Declaration of Independence that kind of kickstarts you had the crisis happening for about 8 years, and then they signed the Declaration of Independence, and that's about halfway through, and then that kickstarts the Revolutionary War, which only lasts about 5 years, right? And then they resolve it, and then you move into spring. And another thing that's interesting about these cycles is that when the issues don't get fully resolved at the end of a fourth turning during the crisis period, it lays the seeds for the crisis for the next fourth turning, right? And we saw this with the Constitutional Revolution. It laid the seeds for the Civil War. And so, in the 1850s, it's 80 years later. 1776 is now 1856. Just right on time. 80 years later, the crisis begins. It escalates until you get to about the backside of the crisis, and then it erupts into the Civil War. We had 25,000 people die in the Constitutional Revolution. We had about 700,000 die during the Civil War, which normalized to our population today would be about 12 million people, just to put it in perspective. It was a pretty bloody Civil War. But, America got through it. And then we had spring, and we had summer and fall again. But what happened with the Civil War is that the issue was basically over the right of secession, right? Could people could states leave the Union or not? And how it got resolved was, no, they can't. They're forced to stay in the Union. Well, that kind of laid the seeds for America's expansionist foreign policy. So then, as going down the path, you had William McKinley, who wanted to have a very much America first, kind of like Trump, trade type of foreign policy, and he gets assassinated. And then Theodore Roosevelt comes in. This is during the unraveling, right? Theodore Roosevelt comes in, and then Woodrow Wilson, and they set America on this path of foreign adventurism, and that's during the unraveling period. And then after World War I, then you go, about another 9-10 years, and the crisis starts. The winter comes, fall turns into winter, and 1929, the Great Depression starts, and it goes for about 10 years. This crisis goes for about 10 years, actually 12 years, because 1929, it goes for 12 years, and then there's Pearl Harbor, and then it's escalating the whole time, right? Because Hitler's over there invading Austria, invading France, just having his way over in Europe. So it's escalating, and then it erupts into World War, and America comes and gets involved in it. And it only lasts about 5 years, about the same as the Constitutional Revolution. America drops a couple nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and boom, that's it. After Hitler had massed 3 million troops and invaded Russia, and then got driven out because of the winter and everything. And Russia actually lost close to 20 million people in World War II. So, I was talking about, I visited the World War II memorial, and there's, a gold star represented 100 people that died, 100 U.S. soldiers. Well, multiply every star by about 50, and that's how many people died in Russia with World War II. Some of their own making, right? But that's it, neither here nor there. But what I'm getting at is, so we see these cycles, Constitutional Revolution laid the seeds for the Civil War with the slavery issue. Civil War laid the seeds with the non-secession ability issue. We're forcing you to stay in the Union. That laid the seeds for this expansionist American foreign policy. Coming out of World War II, the way that crisis got resolved, in addition to Woodrow Wilson with the creation of the Federal Reserve and going, devaluing the gold and demonetizing it, making it illegal, both Hitler, Stalin, Lenin, and Roosevelt and Mussolini all made holding gold illegal. And then coming out of that, we had the United Nations, we had NATO, we had League of Nations, we had IMF, we had World Trade Organization, we had Bretton Woods, with the monetary system. All of that came out of World War II. And that laid the seeds for the next fourth turning. And the next fourth turning arrived right on time. This fourth turning book, it predicted that it would come around 2005 to 2010, and it looks like it got kicked off in 2008, right, with the financial crisis. And and predictably how we've responded to it with the bailouts and with the with the foreign policy and with Libya and Syria and Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan and all of this stuff, it just keeps unraveling and it just keeps escalating in its tensions, deploying a missile shield in Romania, Russia not liking that, China with freedom of navigation, and the Philippines just cutting a deal with China. All of this stuff, it just keeps escalating. It keeps escalating. And so now, so what is this election about? And I think it's actually it's really simple, and it boils down to basically just one issue. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford, recently was questioned by Congress and about Syria. And this is 26 seconds with General Dunford.
What about the option of controlling the airspace so that barrel bombs cannot be dropped?
All the options.
What do you think of that option, sir?
Right now, Senator, for us to control all of the airspace in Syria would require us to go to war against Syria and Russia. That's a pretty fundamental decision that certainly I'm not going to make.
For Syria.
Yeah, so there we go. I mean, he boils it down. And he was testifying, September 26th, and in the second presidential debate and the third presidential debate, Hillary Clinton said that she would implement a no-fly zone, and Donald Trump said that he would not. So it's pretty simple. Escalate the tension with Russia and go to war with them, or not. That's really what this election is all about. And it's coming out of the seeds of World War II, because that issue never got resolved with either Russia or China. Like China, for example, the Kuomintang, the U.S. backed the Kuomintang, and then they had to flee to Taiwan, and so that issue never got resolved. Kind of like when the Bolsheviks took over Russia, and those people fled over to America and became the neocons who are now in charge of the U.S. basically. So we're in the middle of a blood feud, both with Russia and with China, where we're in the middle of a blood feud. And that's what General Dunford is talking about, is the American people are going to go to the voting booth and they're going to choose whether to go to war with Russia, and that will be with Hillary, or whether they're going to de-escalate the situation, and that would be with Trump. And if there's one thing that Trump has accomplished with his presidency run, it's that the establishment hates him. And he's shown irrefutably, explicitly, and beyond a shadow of a doubt that both the U.S. government and the media are just absolutely corrupt to the core. and it's all on video. This Project Veritas, if you haven't watched the videos with Project Veritas, I'd highly recommend it. A couple of really high-ranking Democrats recently resigned, some of them that were in the videos, because there's like 40 hours of videos. Basically, this guy like infiltrated some of the Democratic organizations and took a bunch of like investigative journalist type video. For example, one of the guys that resigned, he had gone to the White House 342 times. He'd met with President Obama 46 times. And this guy took money from the DNC to pay psychotic protesters to initiate violence at some of the Trump rallies. And then they coordinated to have the Bernie Sanders supporters blamed for it. I mean, this is crazy stuff, right? Like, Hillary Clinton, Obama, and the DNC are engaging in domestic terrorism and funding it. I mean, it's really crazy stuff. And some of the other videos, I mean, they're going in depth into the strategy of how they're going to engage in a lot of the voter fraud that they're going to be implementing. And so this Project Veritas is really crazy. And so Trump has pulled back this curtain. He has shown everybody like what the deal is. And, another issue is the United States Supreme Court. And I say that because in the previous fourth turning, there's a line in American legal history called the Constitutional Revolution. And what that is in 1937, the United States Supreme Court flipped completely and started voting all of FDR's legislation constitutional. And the reason they did that is because Roosevelt won in a landslide and had the backing of both the House and the Senate. And he said, look, Supreme Court, if you don't vote my stuff constitutional, then I'm going to pack the Supreme Court. He was going to increase the size of the Supreme Court, put more justices on there so that they would all vote his stuff constitutional. So he politicized the Supreme Court. Just like Hillary and Trump have politicized the Supreme Court this time around. And so we have the short, immediate term issue of going to war with Russia, and then we have the long-term issue of the Supreme Court in this election, because, whoever's going to be president is going to appoint at least one Supreme Court justice, and maybe up to 4 or 5. And they serve for life. And so that's going to have a very, very long-term impact on the direction of America. And so that's the big macro picture, right? And so getting to his question, like, what should I do? I've made enough money with Bitcoin, like, what should I do? I would say, if you haven't read my credit contraction book, you need to read it, because the last section in there, I talked about all this stuff. And remember, I wrote this book 8 years ago, and I talked about a five flag theory, where you need to plant flags like citizenship in one place, residency in another, bank accounts in another, investments in a third, business or how you make money in a fifth. Diversifying your geographical and your political risk is kind of the big issue. Because if the U.S. goes to war with Russia, this could be crazy. I mean, just with the unraveling that we've had and the initial bumping of shoulders, millions of people have been displaced in Syria. Millions. Right? And this is just, like, it's very tame right now. Everybody knew that war was coming with World War I. Everybody knew it was coming, but they thought it was going to be fought on cavalry and with swords and on horseback. And you know what everybody got? They got mustard gas, they got trenches, they got Gatling guns. The issues didn't get resolved, and they got World War II, and 85 million people died. Horrible. this time around, I mean, good gracious, the types of weapons that we have now, chemical, biological, the nuclear and hydrogen bombs. I mean, Russia, last year, they leaked a diagram of one of their weapons. They stuck a nuclear warhead on a torpedo. The torpedo can sail around for 5,200 nautical miles until it gets to its designated place, and then it blows up the nuclear warhead. It causes a 1,650-foot tsunami that rushes to shore. If this thing got set off on the eastern seaboard and another one got set off on the western seaboard, you could see a preemptive first strike from Russia take out 60 to 80 million Americans. Just like that. Boom. And that's what one of these other generals talked about before Congress. He said the next war is going to be extremely fast and highly lethal. So these are things that, I think are important for people to consider, because chances are, there will be plenty of voting fraud. Chances are the establishment will pull out all the stops. They're going to try to definitely overrule the voice of the voters if it's in favor of Trump. They're not going to go quietly into the night, most likely. And it's going to be, and we're set on a path to war. And they're going to put in their establishment candidate that is going to escalate this fourth turning with Russia. And it might even be intentional, because if Russia first strikes the U.S. and the U.S. absorbs it, then they'll have the moral authority to form supranational institutions and then counter-attack Russia with even more highly developed weapons that Russia might not even be aware of, right? And so it might actually be intentional to provoke Russia into this first strike in this war. And Putin's actually said, the world is being pulled in an irreversible direction, and the American media is not talking about it at all. So, these are things that I think should be considered, is how can you protect yourself and your family against these types of risks? Like a couple days, I'm going to be on a plane headed to the Latin American Bitcoin Conference in Buenos Aires, and I'm going to be down there for quite a few weeks until after the election happens. Do you have the time flexibility? Do you have the geographical flexibility? Have you set yourself up with your finances and everything that you could go somewhere else and be in relative not be a refugee, coming over with the shoes on your feet and that's it. Being on a boat that gets sunk in the Mediterranean Sea or something. I mean, this could get really, really dicey, really fast. This fourth turning, and the thing that really amazed me as I was touring all these sites down in D.C., whether it's the Constitutional Revolution, the Civil War, World War II, is just how oblivious everybody seemed to be to what was coming. Even in 1775, one of the quotes was like, if these disputes with the British continue to increase, we might have some problems. It's like they had no idea the degree or the severity of what was coming down the pipeline with all three of these fourth turnings. Why should our fourth turning that we're in the middle of right now be any different? And we've had the first 8 years of it, and it's been pretty bad. Well, now we're going to get the other 8 to 12 years of it. And unfortunately, I think it could very well be even worse than what I kind of thought was coming down the pipeline when I wrote my Great Credit Contraction book. It might even be even worse, which I hope isn't the case. But it is what it is. It's the larger macro issues that we don't necessarily have control over, and we need to focus on the stuff that we do have control over. And so, I just wish everybody the best, and I hope you've made proper preparations and for you and your family and everything. So with that, what does anyone have to lose voting for Trump? I mean, yeah, that's got to be the greatest campaign slogan ever, right? Like, what do you have to lose voting for me? That's pretty funny. Because we do know that it's war with Hillary. And so then the issue is like, do you want to at least try to avert it? Do you want a protest vote? Because even Jill Stein, the ultra left leaning, she's warned about how dangerous Hillary's foreign policy is and how it could lead to nuclear confrontation. So I found that kind of interesting. Like even the ultra liberals kind of squawking like a stuck duck about this stuff. So anyways, Anthony, I hope that guidance is helpful. I really hope that people have their stuff prepared and in order. Who knows? Maybe everything will just go back to being nice and calm and tranquil, and we'll be in summer again like the 1960s, right? But I wouldn't bet on it, not until this crisis has been resolved. And if history is any guide, based on these generational demographic-induced cycles, it could get really crazy really fast. Anyways, with that, ciao for now. You've been listening to the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast, and tune in later, and we'd love for you to share it with your friends.
Be sure to get a copy of the free Bitcoin Guide at freebitcoinguide.com. Got a question or suggestion? Record your voice at bitcoin.kn. Don't be shy. To help the show, share bitcoin.kn with friends, post about it on Reddit, and otherwise spam the interwebs. Your iTunes comments and 5-star reviews are very important to us. Please continue tuning in to the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast, where we release interviews with the top people in the Bitcoin world. Now take some choline and let that Bitcoin knowledge consolidate.